You and your brothers graduate from college and essentially come home to your farm and introduce this new idea to start your own dairy business. Talk to me about that conversation around the dinner table. Like, what did that pitch look like? And how did you guys, like, sort of like convince, I guess, what essentially was a legacy business and sort of like take that first step towards transformation?
Sure. Well, our story actually goes back even a little further than that, in that we're not necessarily as much a legacy business as we are in a legacy industry here in Wisconsin. Wisconsin is known as America's Dairyland. We have the greatest number of dairy farms in the United States and second leading milk producer. Dairy is the largest industry in our state. And so growing up, we grew up on a small traditional size farm. And at that time, when my dad farmed, there were maybe 35 or 40,000 dairy farms in the state. It was a massive industry. My two older brothers actually, after college, as an opportunity, rented a farm for 3 years, bought the cattle and equipment, built some equity, and then 3 years after that, moved to the farm that we currently own. And at that time, they had around 70 cows and a more traditional size model. A third brother joined him at that time. That time I was still in just starting high school, so I was quite a bit younger than my brothers and watching the whole thing. And today we've grown that from that 70 cow farm to 2,200 cows. We have 3,700 head of livestock from newborns up to the mature cows. And then we were dairy farmers only for the first 20 years of our career. And then in 2000, again, looking at the industry, seeing how the industry was changing. At that time, we could see the consumer trends in the United States changing to people looking for something a little more in what they're shopping for. A good, Americans traditionally have had a good expendable income. The average American, of course, we have wide ranges. And so we said, you know what, let's jump in on that. And being America's Dairyland, being the cheese state, we looked at developing our own cheese business. And so we did that and started production in 2002.
So for 20 years, the farm is there. And of course, you went through massive expansion in that time. But then the whole business model has to sort of like change. And there's, I guess, like what we call like sort of like a vertical integration towards the market. And how did that change your view of doing business?
Part of it is your own mindset of who do I need to be when I show up every day, right? We all kind of have a story. Hey, if I'm a farmer, this is how I'm supposed to act. If I'm a writer, if I'm a journalist, if I'm a mechanic, this is how I'm supposed to act. And one thing that we've always done is said, hey, we just need, it depends who we're having the conversation with, right? Be able to sit down with a banker as four brothers that own a growing dairy farm. At that time, we had about 500 or 600 cows. So we were about one third of the size we are now. And to be able to sit down with a banker and convince them that we're going to go into a new industry, start making a value-added product right on our farm, we needed to show up differently for him than we maybe do for the mechanic that's showing up to fix our tractor. And so I think part of it is just being good communicators with each other and with the people we're working with, and then looking at ourselves and say, who do I need to be today?
Talk to me about like you and your three brothers. Were you guys like very much about delegating very specific areas of the business to each other and then sharing information? Or was it more sort of like everyone got involved and sort of like more communal sort of decision making? Like what worked for you guys in terms of a model that then allowed you to grow the way that you did?
I'm not saying it works for everyone who may be listening to this, but what we did was we were communal on big picture and capital intensive things. So again, as I stated earlier, we didn't have a lot of capital to start with. So what little we had was very precious. And so we collaborated very well on having those conversations and also working those long days, sometimes side by side or certainly passing each other throughout the day. We were often arm in arm as far as what we saw maybe was the next thing we needed to do. Where do we need to invest? What's a good investment? And having a similar vision, right? We shared our vision, we talked our vision, we lived it. And so believe it or not, sometimes those decisions were actually the easiest ones because again, we had so much capital to spend. Once we committed to it, we were all on board. Failure wasn't an option. We had no choice. Whatever we were spending the dollars on, we building a cheese factory, we have to make it work.
I'm wondering, like in terms of the consumer trends that you feel are impacting your business the most and that you feel are going to impact now the next generation's thinking the most, what do you feel are going to be the biggest influencers on like how you guys are going to have to operate to stay competitive?
One of the things that we always try to do, number one, we attend national trade shows, 4 or 5 a year. They're in large urban markets, and you get the whole gamut of the industry. So having conversations with buyers from restaurant chains or from distributorships, and just hearing the lingo and what they're looking for. And then we also have the opportunity here in the state of having a very strong dairy marketing organization called Dairy Farmers of Wisconsin. And so they're always doing market insights, market research, looking at who the consumers are, the food fanatics, the influencers on social media and that type of things, because by no means can I, as a small business, think I'm going to keep up pace with the latest trends. And then one thing we always do, it's easy to get overwhelmed by this, Ramya, but we tend to always go back and double down on what we've always done, and that's make really good cheese, make as good a cheese as we can possibly make, high quality milk, high quality cheese, make sure when we get the opportunity for people to take our cheese home and enjoy it, that it meets their expectations. And if we can keep doing that, then at least we have a starting point with people.
Setting that level of quality, it's a hard thing to hold on to over such a long amount of time. So now you also have all this new technology coming in, like, allowing you to optimize, etc. So like, where do you strike the balance in the conversations in terms of like, optimizing production and distribution, etc.? In terms of competition as well, I'm sure you're feeling that. Like some people will, I don't mean to say it like that, but they will sell out eventually and be like, listen, we're going to cave to the pressure and just be like, just mass produce this stuff and like, just like try to sell at scale. So how do you maintain that argument, I guess, like, over decades of business?
Number one, we can't be everything for everybody. We just know we can't be everything for everybody. And we also go back and say, you know what? If we break our model, if we do make a compromise because the automation is going to do this or that, the people that have been our core to this point might leave us, right?
Yeah.
Some of the current customers. And so why would we do that? And being a family business, we get to define that. We get to define our own growth goals, where we invest the money, what our desired return on that money is. We don't have anybody out here with private equity that comes in and says, hey, I want a 30% return for the next 3 years, and then we're going to sell it. We're not in that model. So we just look at and go back to what got us here. And we're firmly believe that we can continue in the future with the model that we've had with producing award-winning, high-quality cheese. All our cheeses are fresh cheeses. So we're farmstead. We use the milk from our own cows, and there's no aging involved. They're all fresh mozzarella, mascarpone, a lot of string cheese and Hispanic style, Oaxaca style cheese. And that's what we make. And we feel that we can make it as well as anybody, certainly in the United States. And we feel we can compete with anybody, even in Italy, with the quality of cheese that we produce.
Family ownership as a competitive advantage. Do you see it? Like, is it important, do you think? Do you feel the consumer cares?
I think being a family business may get people to try our cheese that otherwise wouldn't. I think some people say, you know what? I like the idea that you're farmstead. We're very sustainable in our practices. We produce our own green energy on site. We're family owned. We're in Wisconsin. And people say, you know what? I like that story. Now let me try your cheese. We need that cheese to match the rest of our story. And so I think, if nothing else, that story opens the doors for some customers.
I think the whole sustainability conversation, it's very problematic in many industries. As you said, like where like many businesses are definitely like what we call greenwashing. There's a lot of that going around. So how do you guys measure your accountability there? Like, do you benchmark against competition, or do you try to is it a very internally optimization strategy? Like, that you really look at like, how can we constantly do things better? As you said, like where we live, where we produce, where we work, or do you benchmark against what you're seeing outside? Do you get inspired by what others are doing? Like, how does it work on the sustainability side?
It's more the first part of it. And part of it goes back to just how we got to where we are. And again, as I said, we had to leverage capital. So we just tried to be really smart about what we consumed, how we consumed it, if nothing else, being out of efficiency. So we produced the milk on site. The the act of producing milk, our number one input is feed, which is all produced locally, right? Close to the barns as we can. We handle the milk, we pump it directly to our cheese factory. So there's fewer trucks on the road. How we handle the waste is handled with our farm waste, and then that's handled on our farm field. So we've just built a lot of systems that have been integrated into this puzzle of how we do things. And we've have different pieces of that puzzle that interact to make that beautiful picture, make a functioning business. And so with that also is we have to be careful that our growth, that we can maintain that we're not getting out of our own kind of equilibrium, if you will. And so that's really what we do. Yeah, we can measure certain things, and a lot of what we do, we don't necessarily measure carbon scores, but we do produce renewable energy. I figured some of our internal controls that we have, how we handle our milk, how we handle our waste, we generate heat that we dry bedding. And at the end of the year, we figure we pull the equivalent of about 2,000 truckloads of product that would either be leaving or coming to our farm in the course of a year by everything we do to be efficient and again have some equilibrium in what we do. 2,000.
You're in a very interesting position, I feel, because you mentioned that your brothers are slowly transitioning sort of like into retirement, etc. You'll be the only one from Gen 1.5 to left in the business. What does that make you think of in terms of your position? Like, do you have a moment where you think like, all right, okay, this means I'm going to have to develop certain skills now, or I'm going to have to adjust my communication, or like, how does that feel for you? Because you've known nothing but working with your brothers, basically. So how does that feel for you now that that next stage is announcing itself so clearly?
Certainly, as I said earlier, I have to look at myself differently. I've kind of had 3 or 4 careers in one career, one lifetime, on the same family business. And certainly now I see my role as a succession planner, transition planner. Yeah. I kind of led the charge for my generation with my brothers, and being the interim generation, I was going to cross over to the other side. And so I kind of led just a lot of the administrative part of that administration. We worked with a family business consultant. We still work with about 5 years now. We meet quarterly. And so we just kind of do the next thing. And right now, really, it's about developing that next generation of leaders, both family and non-family.
What do you do to stay that agile and not fall in love too much with, I guess, a position of power, or I guess like a comfort zone? Like, what drives you? Like, how do you cultivate that without it feeling like it's too much all the time? Like, without it feeling like you're constantly on the run. Like, how do you cultivate that mindset?
I think part of it is family culture of how we grew up. As I stated earlier, nothing's guaranteed. Nothing in life is guaranteed. There's no easy button to get to where we are today. So I'm not going to kid myself into thinking that it's there for me. Failure will come up and eat your lunch. And when you think you've got it all figured out, of course, that's when that black swan can take it away from you. So, but that doesn't bother me. Some people say, oh, the responsibility and everything. That doesn't bother me. What bothered me is if I wasn't engaged with what the reality of the day is. Be engaged with what is today, what's happening today, and what do I need to do about it? And what's happening in our world, what's happening over the next year. Rural America right now is on a serious population decline. I was just at a program 2 days ago. And I take that type of information and say, you know what, we have fewer and fewer people that want to live here and do what we do, especially in that 20 or 18-year-old to 30-year-old demographic. Prime A1 times when people start their careers. So that's an example of something where I just say, you know what, we don't need to figure out for the whole world. I'm not going to walk around with my head down. I just need to figure it out for Crave Brothers Farmstead Cheese.
What does it look like now for you, the future? If you look at your family business, do you have something very specific in mind? Like, in 10 years, we're going to be so-and-so, or is it more like just a collective feeling that you want to maintain and a culture?
Our family business has a huge amount of opportunity in front of us based on what we've built, where we live, our natural resources, our community, our culture. We have all kinds of possibilities. The challenge, I think, for me, and certainly for even more so for the next generation, is what are we going to choose out of that? Of all those possibilities, what are we going to grab hold of and work towards? And that's exciting, right? But it also can be a little intimidating because it takes all the things we talked about, right? So that's really the biggest thing, because we could keep on like we are right now. And, we all know how business works, right? If you just keep doing what you've always done, then sooner or later, you're going to be a terminal business. And so we certainly haven't failed from that front of imagining and re-envisioning and working towards something. What I'm really looking forward to, but it's also an opportunity and a challenge for the next generation of leaders at Crave Brothers to say, here's what we think this business could be. And I just want to set that table, and whatever it is, it's going to be their decision. I'm certainly not done yet, and I certainly have things that I want to accomplish in my career. But like every place, someday I will step back, and it'll be great I just want to build a foundation for them to look at things and have a clear vision, and whatever they decide, that it works for them.